Good evening to all the lovers of literature present here. Hope you're all staying safe and doing your bit with social distancing. Thank you so much for tuning in. Do not underestimate the power of one person, the power of you changing the world one tiny step at a time. It could be just your creativity that the world is waiting for. It's not about being perfect, but definitely about giving your best, putting your work and yourself in front of people. We all have it within us, and hoping this session gives us that push that we are waiting to take our lives to the next level. Friends, it is my absolute honor and privilege to welcome you all to this power-packed session. All of you are in for a treat. Our star speaker here has known to leave his audiences always wanting for more. In this lockdown scenario, Prabha Khaitan Foundation and SAS Women of Hyderabad have brought one of India's best-selling authors, Mr. Ashwin Sanghi. After graduating from St. Xavier's and MBA from Yale School, Mr. Sanghi has joined his family business. He wrote his first novel in 2006, and the rest is history. He's part of an overall trend of young businessmen turning to writing as a parallel career. Without wasting much time, let's hear his journey from him. At the end of the session, we will have a Q&A from our viewers. So you can either hit raise hand icon or text in the chat, and then you will be broadcasted on the screen. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the session. Welcome, Ashwinji.
First of all, Vinita, please don't add the G after my name because it makes me feel terribly old. So let's just keep it Vinita and Ashwin, okay?
Okay, perfect.
I hope all of you are doing well, and I hope all of you are safe, and all of you are, I know, Vinita, you are stuck abroad, so just stay safe and obviously stay indoors. But it's nice to be here with all of you, and I'm really looking forward to having this discussion. So let's get cracking.
My first question to you is, you've lived a very remarkable journey, almost like a life very well lived. What, according to you, are the essential components for being successful in personal and professional life? If our audience was taking notes.
Okay. Well, you know, Vinita, I think for me, honestly speaking, I landed up where I did by accident, really. I mean, my journey, of course, has been spoken about a lot of times, but I grew up in a typical Banya environment. My entire training was for a life of business. You know, when I wrote the recent book, The Vault of Vishnu, there's a very interesting little anecdote in The Vault of Vishnu, which talks about the merchants of Samarkand. And the merchants of Samarkand had a wonderful little tradition, which was to, when a child was born, they would touch a drop of honey to the tongue of the child, and they would touch a drop of glue to the palm of the child. And the idea, of course, was that the child should grow up with the sweetest ever tongue so that he can sell pretty much anything to anyone. And he should have a sticky palm so that all the coins that are deposited on that palm should stick to it. Now, if you really think about the Banyas and the Marwadis of our country, when a child is born, we don't have a jap or we don't have shloks being recited. Actually, the two magic words are debit and credit, and those have to be recited into the left and the right ear of the child. Debit, credit, and that's what you grow up with, the two golden words. So that was what my life was supposed to be. And from a very, very young age, I started going to my father's place of work, where I would be taught the essentials of accounting. And of course, I was a voracious reader, so I would also be carrying books to be consumed during lunchtime. And our traditional Munimji in the office used to say that, why are you wasting your time with book reading? Focus on bookkeeping. And don't waste your time reading books, instead read a balance sheet. So I think what was going on in my parallel life was my maternal grandfather, who lived in Kanpur, very fond of reading. used to send me a book every week to read. And because he would send me that book, I was expected to send him back a letter telling him what I had read, what I liked, what I didn't like. And during his lifetime, he sent me a little over 300 books. And
Wow.
so what I didn't realize at that time was that my brain was getting rewired in some ways. And of course, within the Sanghi family, the tradition was very clearly business. So when I would go back to Nanaji, I would ask him, I would say, Nanaji, Munimji is saying that I'm wasting my time with book reading and I should be focusing on bookkeeping. Later, remember one thing in your life, you will, because being from a business background, you will always have a tendency to worship Lakshmi. He said, but the relationship between Lakshmi and Saraswati is very strange. He said, whenever Lakshmi is in a particular, a Saraswati is in a particular room, Lakshmi wants to be in that room. And if Saraswati gets up and leaves, then Lakshmi is also curious, where is she gone? And she also gets up and leaves. So he said, even if your aim is to attract Lakshmi, the short way of doing it is going after Saraswati. And of course, the Hindu pantheon of gods, the only one who can sit between these two Devijis and keep them together is the wonderful Ganesha, which probably explains why Ashwin Sanghi looks a little bit like Ganesha, because the entire focus has been to keep Lakshmi and Saraswati on either side. So if you really had to ask me, what is that one little golden rule that I have taken away from all of this, is live your life like Ganesha. Focus on Saraswati, Lakshmi will follow.
I really like your journey from bookkeeping to book reading to book writing, and your Nanaji, I mean, you've mentioned him everywhere. He's been a very big part of influencing your life.
Yeah.
So you have a remarkable style of weaving mythology and history, and it almost seems like, we want to believe your version of the story and not the conventional version that we've been hearing. So I must applaud you on that, because as a reader, I almost have like a twist to what I have read when I was growing up as a child.
Mm-hmm.
So your books were initially based on myth and religion and history, and now you've brought in philosophy and science with Keepers of Kal Chakra. And in your latest book, Vault of Vishnu, you've even tied in geopolitics and technology. So can you take us through this complex progression? I mean, is there something to the method to this madness, or, did it just come naturally to you?
I'm glad you called it madness, Vinita, because sometimes honestly it feels a lot like that. But there is actually really, people want to actually put me into some sort of a compartment. They say, oh, Ashwin Sanghi writes on mythology, or he writes mythological fiction, or he's a conspiracy writer and writes conspiracy fiction, or he writes historical fiction. So these are compartments. For me, I have never been a person who has been focused on one of those compartments. What I'm very curious about is where the overlap between those compartments happens. That fascinates me a lot. So for example, I mean, if you really think about it, the two subjects which pop up most often in my books are, of course, history and myth. And my personal view on both of those topics is a little bit contrary to what the world believes, in the sense that most people tend to think of mythology as fantasy, and most people tend to think of history as fact. But that's not really my personal view. It was George Santayana who said that history is a pack of lies about events that never happened, written by people who were never there. So in that sense, history is just one version of events. History is what the victors have narrated. And you can have several versions of history. When I was writing Chanakya's chant, my main point of reference for the life of Chanakya was a work called Mudra Rakshas, which was written by Vishaka Datta. And that was written as a Sanskrit play almost 700 years after Chanakya's lifetime. But you'll be surprised that the content of Mudra Rakshas is what determines our historical context of Chanakya today. What if Vishakadatta was an ancient day Ashwin Sanghi who was liberally mixing fact and fiction and creating something which could be performed on stage? But that is our understanding of history today. Mudra Rakshas is fact, almost. On the flip side, you have myth, which is, of course, my favorite definition of myth, of course, is C.S. Lewis, who said that a myth is a lie that reveals the truth. In that sense, myth needs to be a little more honest because it doesn't claim to be factually correct. It's asking you to search for a deeper meaning. And in that sense, what I tend to do is I tend to take these two independent worlds, the world of myth and the world of history, and I put them into a high-speed particle collider. You know, the one that they have in Switzerland, in CERN. I put them into that particle collider and I bring them charging towards one another at a very, very high speed. And hopefully they crash against one another and a fusion process takes place where myth plus history no longer exist as independent elements, but myth plus history fuse together in order to create a new element which is known as mystery. Because ultimately, what we are concerned with is that delicious question which is known as what if? What if Jesus Christ survived the crucifixion, and what if he actually traveled to India? What if he lies buried in the tomb at Rosabal? What if Krishna wasn't a mythological character but a historical character? What if the Mahabharata war actually took place? What if those rocks in the Polk Strait are actually the stones that were thrown by Hanumanji and the Vanar Sena? So those are the delicious questions that we are asking ourselves. So the overlap between spaces is what makes things exciting. And that's pretty much what I do.
Yeah, that's amazing. I know a lot of people in the audience are aspiring writers. So for our audience, can you break down the process of writing a book, especially for a new writer, for an aspiring writer, for someone who's writing for the first time? The Keepers of Kal Chakra, Chanakya's Chant, and now even Vault of Vishnu. I mean, there's so much of research behind it. So is there like some key components that people can think about, or like talking to experts in the field, doing research? What is it?
Well, what I can tell people is, one, that there is nothing like writer's block. So there are people who believe that they land up with a writer's block. That's nonsense. That's procrastination. And the reason why I never land up with writer's block is because of the process that I follow. Let me take you not only through the process, but also before the process. I think because they are correlated, they are interrelated. The first thing is that most people start thinking about ideas when they want to get down to writing a book. Vinita, that doesn't work, because your best ideas don't come when you plan to write a book. They come to you any time of the day, any time of the month, year, the decade. So what I do is I maintain a journal. My journal is not maintained in an old-fashioned way. It's actually in the form of a Gmail account, which was started up sometime around 2006. And in the last 13 or 14 years, I've emailed myself about 10,000 times. And those emails are typically something interesting that I've seen, something interesting that I have observed, a picture that I have taken, a page from a book that I have photographed, a web link that was very exciting. So that becomes really a journal of ideas. When I start working on a Bharat series book, normally it takes me about 2 years from start to finish. What happens during that time? The first part of it is, of course, ideation, because I will revisit my idea bank and I will see, okay, which are the 3 or 4 or 5 ideas that are really interesting at this point of time. But there is always a trigger which will make a particular idea seem more valuable than another. So for example, in Chanakya's Chant, it was the general elections of 2009, where despite the elections having been won, there was a long gap in cabinet formation. And I began to wonder, was politics in this country always so messy? So it was a comparison of the old times versus the new times. For example, the Rosabal line, it was a chance visit to the Rosabal shrine, and suddenly realizing that the person who lay buried there was known to most of the locals as someone called Yuz Asaf, who they considered to be nothing else but Jesus Christ. And that triggered something. In the case of the Krishna Key, it was a party where someone who was absolutely inebriated revealed to me in a rather secret fashion that he considered himself to be the 10th avatar of Vishnu. And of course, he was royally drunk when he said that, but nevertheless, it triggered a thought in me. I said, my God, there is someone who thinks when he is in this sort of a state that he is the 10th avatar of Vishnu, and that's how the Krishna Key was born. So there is always a trigger. Once the trigger has happened, I will typically invest anywhere around 6 months to a year researching that particular topic. The research will be of various types. In the case of the Krishna Key, for example, it was obviously a reading of the Mahabharata, and similarly, it was also visiting a lot of places which were associated with the Krishna story, Dwarka, Mathura, and Somnath, and various other places. In the case of Sialkot Saga, it was talking to people who had lived through Calcutta and Bombay of the 1950s and 60s, because most of the story was set there. In the case of Chanakya's chant, it was the reading of the Arthashastra and the Mudra Rakshas. In the case of the Vault of Vishnu, it was about almost around 6 to 7 weeks of travel through China, because half the story is set in China. So there was lots and lots of research involved. Once I'm done with the research, that's the time I'll sit down to do plotting. Typically, my plotting will take me around 3 months, which is where every twist and turn in the story, any event that happens, any particular backdrop element that needs to be covered in that chapter will be entirely there. Then that's the time when I sit down to start actually writing, which is about a 6-month process. And it's actually, frankly, Vinita, the easiest part to do, because at that point of time, I am actually like a child with a coloring book. So the outlines are already drawn, and I just need to decide whether I'm going to be using a green crayon or a yellow crayon or a red crayon to fill the outlines. And then, of course, the last 3 months are for multiple rewrites as well as for edits and polishing. So end to end, 2 years, very, very structured and very, very scientific process, as a result of which there is no writer's block.
Oh, okay, perfect. Also, I really like this whole inspiration where you got the Vault of Vishnu from. I heard you were having tea at a stall, and somebody said Chini Marke, and then you did this whole research on Chini and China, and so can you tell us a little bit more about that? And it just ties into your previous answer. Inspirations can come from anywhere.
Anywhere. Actually, they can come from anywhere. And the thing is that to a certain extent, what I've at least felt is that the whole India-China equation and the whole India-China relationship, unfortunately, somewhere down the ages, because China closed itself off, we have, completely sort of forgotten it in some ways. Of course, it's been reawakened in recent times, but for all the wrong reasons. So as a result of which now, if you talk about sharing by China, the only thing that is there in your mind is probably COVID-19. But if you really look back into history, it's very fascinating for me that, I was actually having this cup of tea and it just clicked, Chini. Why am I having Chini, and why is it called Chini? And I realized that actually it was called Chini because the very first sugar processing unit that came up which was in West Bengal, the first modern sugar processing unit, roughly around the 18th century, came up in a place called Achipur in Bengal. And it was set up by a Chinese person, a Chinese immigrant. Now, what is very fascinating to me is the fact that when earlier traveler accounts are there, for example, the travel accounts of Xuanzang to India, we find that actually he was fascinated by the fact that the Indians had hard sugar candies, which he had never tasted before. So he hadn't experienced that flavor before. And he, in fact, took those candies back for the emperor when he returned. So I thought to myself, is it possible that actually sugar was not there in China? It was there in India. It went from India to China, and then eventually came back to us in the 18th century in the form of processing mills. Now, that's very interesting because it makes the exchange between these two countries not a one-way exchange, but a two-way exchange. Similarly, for example, if you think in terms of something like chai ki patti, again, chai comes from the Chinese word. And similarly, for example, the greatest export of India was Buddhism. I mean, in the year 72 AD, it was two Buddhist monks from India who landed up in a city called Loyang in China, where they brought with them manuscripts of the word of Buddha. And a temple was dedicated to them. It's now, you can visit it, of course. It's called the White Horse Temple because these two monks arrived with a white horse on which all the manuscripts were loaded. And then they spent several years translating all of these manuscripts into Mandarin so that the average Chinese could understand it. But if you really think about something like martial arts, we all know about Kung Fu, but I mean, many of us have completely no idea about someone called Bodhidharma. Bodhidharma, of course, was a great Pallava prince who traveled through the Cambodia route into China. And of course, he landed up in Shaolin, and he was not granted admission by the abbot because Bodhidharma was a very unruly sort of fellow. And so the abbot did not grant him permission into the monastery. He sat in a cave for the next 9 years and meditated. And during those 9 years, an imprint of his was left on the wall, which came to be known as the shadow wall, because of the light that was streaming in and passing through him onto the wall. But of course, he had to keep his limbs and his muscles and his blood circulation going. So he devised a routine which consisted of the martial arts that he knew, as well as yogic routines, yogic breathing, as well as what we now call Zen meditation, which is, sort of what we consider to be now deep concentration. And when he came out and it was eventually 9 years later granted admission, he taught the other monks this combination of Silambam and Kalaripayattu and yoga and breathing and, Zen Buddhism, as it were. And that came to be known as Kung Fu. And of course, if you go to Shaolin, everyone knows who Bodhidharma is. But if you ask the average Indian, they don't have a very good idea. When you talk of Bodhidharma, they think maybe you're talking about the Buddhist faith, Bodhidharma. That's what they think. But the name in itself is not famous. So those are the things which I wanted to bring out through the Vault of Vishnu, that where those connections have been.
No, absolutely. And just listening to you, just listening to the enthusiasm in your voice, it's just great to see so much of passion for the subjects that you have. And for everyone who's joining in, you guys must check out Vault of Vishnu. It's Ashwin's latest book, and it's really a treat. Another thing I want to touch upon is in all your books, like right from Chanakya's chant, you have strong female lead characters. In Chanakya's chant, it was Chandni, Krishna's key was Priya and Radhika. And now even in Vault of Vishnu, you have Pam and Anu. So what's your take on Shiva and Shakti? And is it intentional? Or how does it work?
Okay, so Vinita, I'm holding up my hand here. There are 5 dhagas on my wrist. And, there are actually, in some ways, there are what I consider to be the 5 Shaktis of my life. And there are those 5 Shaktis in my life. The first Shakti in my life is my mother, because she actually, because of her, she's the one who inculcated the habit of reading in me. So had it not been for her, I would have simply been one more Banya businessman. That's all. The second Shakti in my life is my wife, because when sometime around 2004, 2005, when I was just about getting started on Rosabal, she was the one who actually said, listen, this needs to be converted into a novel and you need to write it. And she actually encouraged me to make that transition. The third Shakti in my life is my sister. Through my most difficult times, she lives in Delhi, but through my most difficult times, she was the one who always sort of gave me that pep talk and said, just keep going. And you don't need to worry about what everyone else is saying. Just do what you think is right. My fourth Shakti is my Rakhi sister. She's the one who brings a lot of life and vivaciousness and fun and excitement in otherwise the monotonous life of a writer. And finally, of course, the fifth Shakti is Ma Shakti herself, the one who actually puts the words on my paper. Because when I look back at the words that I have written, I realize that I haven't written them. The words are simply through me, but the inspiration for those words has come from somewhere else. And I realize that that is a dain of Ma Saraswati, and I never forget it. Because the day you forget it, then they'll stop flowing. So those are the 5 Shaktis. Now, why is Shakti so important? Because to a very great extent in our world, we have forgotten what the relevance of Shakti is. Shakti, frankly, doesn't really signify male or female. It signifies energy. When we look at various concepts in our lives, we think of them as opposites. Think, for example, of light and dark. We think that these are opposites, but light and dark are not opposites. Darkness is simply the absence of light. We think of heat and cold as opposites, but cold is not the opposite of hot. Cold is simply the absence of heat, period, nothing more. Foolishness and wisdom, what is it? Foolishness is the absence of wisdom. Death and life, what is that? Death is the absence of life. And similarly, when we talk of Shiva and Shakti, or masculine and feminine, frankly, masculine is simply the absence of Shakti. Shiva is the absence of Shakti. So there are some who are more aware of the Shakti within them, and there are some who are slightly less aware of the Shakti within them. And that is why we consider them to be opposites, but they aren't opposites. It's simply the absence of something. So I have always wanted that Shakti remains on my side. And that is why you will always find that in most of my books, there tends to be a very, very strong female lead.
No, absolutely. Just seeing the bands in your hand, it's something that we never know about Ashwin Sanghi. So thanks for sharing it with our audience. It's quite intimate. I would like to switch gears a little bit. You're really ruling the charts with mythology and fiction, but you've also ventured into non-fiction, the 13 Steps of Bloody Good Luck. And in fact, there is a very good story behind the title also. So it would be great to hear it from you, how the title came to being. And also, I'd like to know that as a writer, is there a switch between fiction to non-fiction? What is your, do you have a favorite? And the whole concoction of how you play around with this.
Okay, let me answer the first question first in terms of the switch to non-fiction, as it were. Actually, it wasn't a switch, it was just experimentation with another genre. But Vinita, most people are aware of the fact that when I started out in 2005, And I ended up, actually, the Rosabal line was completed in 2005. I started writing it earlier. And then from 2005 till 2007, I was trying to find a publisher or a literary agent who would be willing to represent me. And that's the time I realized that how difficult it is to actually make a breakthrough in the creative world. I ended up with tons and tons of rejections. And during those times, the only thing that kept me going was a bulletin board in front of my desk. On that bulletin board were several numbers. People used to come and think, wonder what are all these random numbers that Ashwin has in front of him. And actually those numbers were 12, 18, 30, 34, 38. Now those are actually rather self-explanatory, because 12 is the number of times that the first book in the Harry Potter series, The Philosopher's Stone, from J.K. Rowling, was rejected by publishers. And 18 was the number of times that Jonathan Livingston Seagull was rejected. And 30 was the number of times that Stephen King's first thriller, Carrie, was rejected. And 33 was the number of times that Chicken Soup for the Soul was rejected. And of course, 38 was the number of times that Gone with the Wind was rejected. So I used to keep psyching myself out, saying that, hey, listen, Ashwin, you are going to be a very good writer one day because you're beating the pants off J.K. Rowling. So I used to find ways to sort of keep myself motivated and keep myself going. But it had reached a point where the list had run out. There were no literary agents to approach. There were no publishers left to approach. And I was going through a period of a low. And there was a family friend who used to come over on the weekends to spend some time with my dad. And he asked me, he said, "Beta, you're looking very depressed. What's the matter?" And I said, "Uncle, I'm depressed because now there are no publishers left to approach." So he said, "Remember one thing in life, 99% is about good luck." So I asked him, I said, "But what about the 1%? That 1% must be about hard work, talent, management, efficiency, networking, resources. There are so many things which go towards making one successful." And he said, 99% is about good luck, beta, and 1% is about bloody good luck. And I wondered to myself, I said, what is this bloody good luck that he is talking about? But I made a mental note that one day I'm going to write about bloody good luck. And so it was sometime around 2014 that I got down to actually writing a little book, which was known as 13 Steps to Bloody Good Luck. And of course, that book was not meant to be a series, Vinita. It was just meant to be a one-off book in order to explain, or rather to demystify, what I consider to be good luck. Because a lot of people think that good luck is something that comes to us from the heavens, whereas I was attempting to demystify it and tell you as to what is it that makes quote unquote lucky people lucky. What is it that they do in order to attract that luck? And but the book really worked. And we went into multiple print runs within the first year itself. And my publisher came back and said, if we can demystify a topic like luck, then why can't we demystify so many other topics? And that's how then we started working with other writers who had a vertical domain expertise in various subjects. So someone wanted to write on health, someone wanted to write on wealth, someone wanted to write on marks and parenting and what have you. So they brought their vertical domain knowledge. What they weren't able to necessarily bring to the table was the ability to tell a story. And that's what I pretty much try and do, that I want to tell you stories in a way that it is engaging. And that's what that combination was all about, that taking the domain expertise of someone and then converting it into a very compelling story.
Wow, that's perfect. I just have like a few rapid fire questions because the chat has been buzzing with a lot of questions, and I do want our audience to ask you a few questions.
Sure.
So just like a few rapid fire questions. What is your favorite book, or do you have a book that inspired you?
Sure. For me, I think the go-to book, the book that I have been back to the most number of times, is a book which is known as the Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yoganand. And that is a book which I've probably visited at least a good 20, 25 times during my lifetime. And every time I go back to that book and I do another reading of it, I find that there are certain things which I hadn't understood as well the previous time. And it opens up a new vista in terms of my thinking. But most importantly, it's the book which made me realize that just because I can't understand some things doesn't make them less real. So in other words, the ability to retain a very, very open mind in terms of what is real and what is unreal.
One of your favorite authors is Dan Brown,
Yeah.
and his books went on to be movies. So do you have something similar on the cards?
So currently, many of my books are at various stages of contractual obligations. But there is a huge gap between a contract versus an execution of a project. So, for example, a book like Chanakya's Chant has been contracted 3 times. Currently, it is still with a production house in terms of a possible OTT. Similarly, Sialkot Saga is with another production house for an OTT. The Krishna Key is with Eros Entertainment for a movie. So there are multiple deals that have happened in terms of adaptations. But what I'm noticing about our industry in this country is that actually what they want is ready-made material, not necessarily having to revisit a book and then convert that material for screen. So in fact, in the year 2020, I'm actually working towards writing original material also for screen. So I will not only be depending on my books to get adapted, but I will also be turning out original material for the audiovisual segment.
Okay. Can you talk about co-authoring with James Patterson? What do you prefer, writing a book on your own or co-authoring?
Well, I don't know. I think they are just 2 very different spaces, but both can be equally enjoyable. James, of course, is a prolific writer, and he is genuinely a master of the thriller segment. He understands how do you actually enhance suspense, how do you make sure that your reader will turn the page, and he works on the mantra, which is less is more. So in that sense, James Patterson novel, a thriller, will get over in about roughly 60 to 70,000 words, whereas an Ashwin Sanghi for a Bharat series books needs 110 to 120,000 words to be able to convey a story. Of course, James works on larger than life characters. Sometimes if you were to compare, let's say, James Patterson versus Ashwin Sanghi, probably James Patterson is an M.F. Hussain. Very, very broad brush strokes done on a large canvas very quickly. On the other hand, Ashwin Sanghi is probably a miniature artist from Jodhpur or Jaipur who's working very, very minute details in order to be able to give you such a small picture, but in excruciating detail. Now, those were the 2 people who were being brought together in order to be able to write these thrillers. The difference between writing together versus writing solo is pretty much like, let's say, for example, singing. When you're singing on your own, you can pretty much take whichever liberties you want in terms of the pauses, in terms of the octaves that you take, in terms of the notes that you hit. But when you're singing in partnership with someone as a jugalbandi, then in that case, you need to also watch the other person's notes, because then you'll be able to arrive at something which is very melodious. And in fact, it will sound even better probably than just a solo, because there will be also elements of harmony, which you can achieve with multiple voices. And that's precisely what happens in a partnership. But in order to make that work, both of you have to be very, very closely synced in terms of how you are planning to undertake that job. So the way I think about a co-writing project with James Patterson is that James leaves from Delhi, I leave from Bombay, and we are walking towards one another. And we have to meet somewhere in the middle. And so we have to figure out a date on which we will meet and an exact point at which we are going to meet and the routes that both of us are going to take in order to get there exactly on that date at that time and at that place. So you have to coordinate your movements in order to be able to achieve that. And that's precisely what we did with those two thrillers.
Okay, one of the questions which has been repeating in the chat is if somebody had to pick up the first book of yours to read, out of all your books, which one would you recommend to the newers who want to be introduced to your writing?
Well, I would say that in case you are, my problem, the problem with Ashwin Sanghi books and Ashwin Sanghi readers in some ways is that no one book is like another one. So if you read the Rosabal line, actually the research in the Rosabal line is overwhelming. But if you love those sort of densely packed theological thrillers, then you will love the Rosabal line. But if you don't, you will hate it. By the time that I wrote the Chanakya's Chant, which was the second book, there were a ton of people who had loved the Rosabal line who said, what has he done? Why has he cheapened himself? This is feeling like a masala thriller. And then there were the other readers who hadn't liked the Rosabal line and came along and they said, Chanakya's Chant, it's his best book ever. So the nature of each book is very, very different. I would say that if you are looking for an easy read, then probably Chanakya's Chant is your best shot because it's like makhan. You're just cutting through makhan.
It's one of my favorite books.
Yeah. If you are someone who is focused on mythology, and if mythology interests you, then probably the Krishna Key should be your starting point. If you are one of those who simply likes Bollywood masala films, but with a historical backdrop, then probably the Sialkot saga is for you. If you're fundamentally of a scientific disposition and you believe that there is an overlap between spirituality and science, then in that case, probably Keepers of the Kal Chakra is the book you should read. So, I mean, it really depends in terms of, your taste really.
Okay, this question was asked by Pooja and Smriti. And one similar question that I see from Suman and Rishi is, are you a researcher or are you a writer? And I mean, in the same retrospect, like, how do you balance entrepreneurship and book writing? And after this, I'll open it up.
Fine. So honestly, I'm neither a researcher nor am I a writer. I have always maintained that what I have always wanted to be is just a storyteller. So it was the Hollywood director Alfred Hitchcock. He said that the length of a movie has to be related to the endurance of the human bladder. So in other words, you'll only sit for a movie as long as you don't need to get up in order to be able to take a bathroom break. Now, the point is that with a book, when I'm sitting down to write, I like to visualize that there are 10 people sitting in a circle around me. And those 10 people are listening to a story which is being narrated by me. And out of that, there are 3 or 4 who need to get up and take a restroom break. But they don't get up because the story is so interesting. So that's pretty much what I try to do, to make, the most difficult task of a writer is to actually get you to turn the page. And that's what I want to do always. It's my primary objective, get you to turn the page. And we are living in declining attention spans. I mean, there is the very sort of scary statistic which indicates that in the year 2013, the average human attention span was 8 seconds. And that of a goldfish is 9 seconds, which means, in other words, that we can actually hold the attention of a goldfish far more than we can hold the attention of a human being. So in that sense, I have always wanted to tell a good story. And so whether it is my research or whether it is my writing or my rewriting, in fact, frankly, Vinita, I'm a lousy writer, but I'm a fairly decent rewriter. So I rewrite a lot. So I would say I'm a combination of a storyteller and a rewriter.
Okay, perfect. I'm just going to open it up to the audience here. So can we have Piyush Gupta asking the first question?
Do you want me to be looking at these questions and answering? Because
No, Anandita will just
Piyush
patch
Gupta is not there.
okay.
Okay,
So then we should just move on, because otherwise we'll end up consuming your time. You know.
Sure. Namita, can we have Namita ask the next question?
Hello. How do I ask?
Namita, I can hear you. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, hi. Okay.
Hi.
I wanted to ask, what are you working on now, currently?
Okay. This has two parts. One is, of course, what I was meant to be working on for the next 2 years, till such time as the next book in the Bharat series comes out.
Okay.
That, of course, is a storyline which I'm at this point of time I'm not going to reveal. But during the lockdown, the moment the lockdown started, I had decided that this is the time when I will take a decision to actually write a couple of projects for web series and web streaming platforms. So currently, in fact, I have actually written 2 seasons of 2 shows. Those I hope to be done with by the time that this lockdown ends. Once I'm done with these 2, then I will start working on the 7th book in the Bharat series.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Namita.
Thanks, Namita. Can we have Lenka ask the next? Lenka?
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, thank you, Vinita. Ashwin, thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me in this webinar. It's very inspirational to talk to you. And actually, my background is I'm a mother of 2, and I'm a Montessori teacher, and I'm writing children's books as well. And actually, my attention went to your book about 13 steps of bloody good parenting, because that's my field as well. Because I know my personal motivation to start to write full films about this. I would like to know your personal motivations, because as I saw your life structure, I saw like your son might be something about 17 years old right now, or something like that.
Absolutely.
So you went through easier and difficult times, and last year you published and co-write this book. So what was your motivation to it?
Sure. Nice meeting you, Lenka. The motivation for a lot of these topics, honestly, it's not as if, I'm not an expert at anything. And I think probably that makes me rather lucky in that sense, because I don't need to limit myself to any one thing. I'm not an expert on anything, and certainly the least of it is the topic of parenting, because I've done a rather lousy job when it comes to my role as a parent. But to my mind, Lenka, the one thing that came across, I used the services of a very, very dear friend, Kiran Mandral, who is also a mummy blogger and knows far more about this subject of parenting than I do. And I think if you really read that book, what comes across is that there is no one size fits all. There are a few things that you can probably navigate through, but to actually try and treat any book as a so-called user's manual for parenting that, sometimes we as parents, we really wish that our children came along with an instruction booklet, but they don't. So,
You're right.
so to that extent, you realize that there isn't a one size fits all. And probably the old proverb, there's that proverb which says that he or she who knows not and knows not that he knows not is probably wise. So the fact that you don't know, and that you at least acknowledge the fact that you don't know, probably is the greatest wisdom in parenting. Because very often simply not having that knowledge means that you will muddle through. And I think that is what we have tried to bring out in 13 Steps to Bloody Good Parenting. Of course, we've covered all the usual obvious things, like, for example, nutrition or health or security of the child and all of those sort of things. But the reality is that we put so much of stress and emphasis in our world on things like, for example, education and degrees and science and technology and medicine. But the most complicated amongst all of these is probably the world of parenting, for which we do not have any degrees.
Yeah, thank you very much for your answer. I completely agree, because as I went through my motherhood, I found out that more than for my children, I need a manual for myself.
Absolutely.
Sometimes
Absolutely.
to control myself, my emotions, or what I'm talking and saying.
Absolutely. But
Yeah.
very well said. Yes, parents need the manual more than the kids. Absolutely.
Sometimes, yeah.
Thanks so much, Lenka. We'll move on to the next question from Rajeshri.
Hello.
Hi.
Yes. Hi, Vinita. Thank you so much. Yes. Good evening, sir.
Hi,
It's
Rajshri.
nice to be on this session with you. I want to know what inspires you to write. Like, it comes naturally, or you have to choose the topic according to the situation, or how you go about it?
For me, Rajshri, nothing ever comes naturally. I mean, I'm one of those people who, I've just sort of gone through the process of explaining the process by which I write. And it's a very structured process. And similarly, even ideation for me is a very, very structured process. So typically at any given point of time, I will be, when I'm starting on a new book, that's the time when I will be tossing around 5 or 7 alternative ideas, because the focus in my mind at that moment is that this is an idea that I will need to live with for probably the next 2 years. So can I really live with this idea for 2 years? There are those who talk about the fact that writing is an art. And I'm not able to relate to those who say that writing is an art, because for me, it's always been a craft. So, art means that you've got a blank canvas and you pretty much do what you want. For me, craft is something like a carpenter turning out a particular type of deity, a particular idol. But his first idol will not be the same as the 100th or the 1000th. He will have become, so in that sense, I am work in progress. I'm moving from my first to my 5th, to my 10th, to my 15th. And hopefully with each one of them, I'm honing my skills a little better, and I'm understanding what works and what doesn't work, and what are the things that I need to be looking out for. So in that sense, I'm far more systematic and structured than most writers are. So I'm sorry, I don't fit that romantic notion of someone who has lots of waves of inspiration, as they were.
Okay, but so well and very humbly answered. Thank you so much. Thank you, Vinita.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have 3 quick questions. So we'll go with Neeru Mohan.
Yeah.
Hi, Neeru.
Leave नहीं कर सकते.
Neeru?
Yeah, she needs to unmute. I can see that her.
Neeru, can you unmute and talk?
Yeah, I am unmute now, right?
Okay.
Am I audible?
Yes, absolutely, Neeru. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah. Good evening, Vinita, and good evening, Ashwin ji. My question is, what inspires you to write 13 steps to bloody good luck? Actually, I have read it 2 or 3 times. I have read all the 13 series. So what inspires you to these 13 series, sir? And is it really that good luck attracts?
Okay. I think what I have tried to explain really is that, different people have different definitions of luck, Neeru. I mean, there is, for example,
Yes.
there is someone, for example, like, let's say, Thomas Jefferson, who said, of course, I believe in luck. The harder I work, the more of it I seem to have. Or, for example, there was the French actor and writer Jean Cocteau. He said, of course, I believe in luck. How else does one explain the success of others? So in other words, if I got lucky, then if I became successful, it's because I worked hard. And if you got lucky, if you got successful, it was because you were lucky. But I think my favorite definition of luck is probably the Roman philosopher Seneca, who said that luck is simply a matter of preparation meeting opportunity. So in that sense, if you have spent your time preparing, then you are able to look at opportunities far better. At the crux of 13 steps to bloody good luck is basically what I call the 3 R's. In the US, of course, the 3 R's means reading, writing, and arithmetic. And of course, in the world of luck, the 3 R's implies raise, recognize, and respond. So how do you raise the number of opportunities that come your way? How do you recognize those opportunities? And how do you respond to those opportunities better? So that is how I have attempted to demystify that why do some people tend to be luckier than others? And that luck is not really magic. It's not mysticism. It's not the Nimbu Mirchi. It's not the horseshoe. It's not the rabbit's foot. It's about the 3 R's. That some people are better at raising their opportunities, recognizing their opportunities, and responding to their opportunities. And that's what I genuinely believe that we need to take away from all of the jargon.
So there are like so many questions coming in. I'm so sorry if you're pressed for time, but we'll just go with Prasanchand Bhandari next.
Okay.
Are you there? You need to unmute it. Okay, should we just go with Bhumika in the meantime?
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Bhumika?
Hi, Mr. Sanghi. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Bhumika. Please go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Sanghi, do you ever go through any kind of self-doubt in the process of your writing? And if so, how do you deal with it? Self-doubt in the sense of, will this plot work? Will this story work? Will people read this? And also another thing is, do you use someone as a soundboard? Do you bounce ideas of someone when in doubt?
Sure. I think that's a very important question. I genuinely don't believe that if it was Hawthorne who said that easy reading is damn hard writing. So when you are actually attempting to make something into an easy read, if you are not experiencing lots of doubt, then you're not doing yourself a favor, because it is that doubt which will make you go back to your manuscript and revisit it and see what needs to be fixed. So I do believe that doubt is very, very good. For me, typically with most of my books, I will share the story at the plot outline stage itself with my publisher. Very often I share it with about 3 or 4 people who I have a lot of confidence in my wife included, who will tell me as to whether the story outline itself is working or not. Then very often I end up sharing chunks of the written material during the stage when I'm writing it, just to get a sense of whether it's working or not. By the time that I'm actually done with the final manuscript, normally the book will end up going through at least about 3 or 4 rewrites at my end before it even goes to the editor. So the Vault of Vishnu underwent 5 rewrites before it went to the editor. So I think that process of doubting yourself is a very, very good process. What I don't agree with is worrying about that doubt, because in anything which is a creative field, there are going to be enough naysayers. So the point is, you cannot, it's one size does not fit all. No matter how good your book is, there will be a chunk which will say, oh, that was outstanding, Ashwin. And there will be those who will say, this was utterly nonsense. Why are you in writing? Please leave immediately. So, I mean, I think understanding the nature of the space that we are operating in is very important. There is the old proverb which says that the relationship between the writer and the critic is the relationship between the dog and the lamppost. So the poor lamppost has to just stand there and wait for the dog to do its business. So just stop, get that part of it out of your mind. But yes, have doubt in order to improve your work.
Thank you so much. That was very well answered. Thanks.
Thanks, Bhumika.
So we have one last question. I will take it from Vaishali. Vaishali.
Hello, this is Vaishali.
Hi, Vaishali, I can hear you. No, I can't hear you. And now we are back with Bhumika. Yeah, okay. We just need to unmute. Yeah, okay.
Yes, Vaishali, please go ahead.
Yes, this is Vaishali here. And it was really nice listening to you, although I've not read your books, I must admit. But I do have a question with regards to, do you plan on combining or fusing your entrepreneurial journey, with your business background, with your new talents, and or rather your self-discovered talents?
Well, Vaishali, I have always joked that, 15 years ago, I was a businessman who was trying to be a writer. Now I'm a writer who's trying to be a businessman. So in that sense, there is always some amount of overlap between those two worlds. Probably I'm one of the few writers who really likes to sort of see himself as the CEO of a book. So very often, I will tend to get my hands dirty in things like marketing and promotions and cover designs and so many other things, because that there is that business carryover from several years of having been in it. And similarly, for example, even once I've written books, there is obviously that entire focus on, okay, now how can this be sold better? Or ultimately, this story, how can it be leveraged in multiple ways? When a book of mine comes out, typically within the first 1 year, I will end up having at least about 8 or 10 translations of the book out within the first year or 15 months. So we try and maximize the number of people to whom the story can reach. All of that, to a very great extent, happens because of the fact that I have this business background and an MBA and all of that. So those old habits die hard in that sense.
It's very commendable that you have a Yale background. Just one more question. Do you have a choice of publishers that you like to go with?
All my books in the Bharat series have been with the publisher who first gave me a break, because I genuinely believe that the relationship with the publisher is not just a commercial arrangement. The publisher has to be your friend. So the Rosabal line was published first by Westland in India, and Westland has continued to remain my publisher even after 6 books in the Bharat series have come out. My books, which are co-authored with James Patterson, are published through Penguin Random House. And for the US, they are published through Little Brown and Company. But those are primarily James's books more than my books. But yes, I have had an experience in terms of working with multiple publishers. But as far as the true love of my life, that is Bharat series. And the Bharat series remains with Westland, not because of Westland as a company, but because its CEO, Gautam Padmanabhan, is a dear friend, and he's my friend, philosopher, guide. He's a person that I share my stories with. We talk about those stories to kingdom come. And so I have a lot of, he's in that sense the pillar that I depend on. I lean on that pillar.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I won't take more of your time. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Vishal. Thank you.
We have two burning questions, so if you can take it really quickly.
Sure.
Tarun, can you go next? Tarun?
Yeah,
If you can unmute and go.
yeah. Can you hear
Hi,
me?
Tarun. Yes, I can hear
Yes,
you,
we can.
Hi,
Tarun.
Ashwin. First of all, let me thank Prabha Khetan Foundation and my dear friend Anil for giving me this wonderful opportunity to have a discussion with you. It's a privilege and, of course, an honor.
Thank you, Tarun. Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you for picking my question. I am a very interesting question about Chanakya's chant.
Sure.
Chanakya is one of the most mystical characters and difficult, complex, someone who has gored into the geopolitical scenario like the father of politics or
Yeah.
Kautilya Shastra.
Yes.
And I have, please don't get me wrong, but I have read Devdutt Patnaik and
Yes.
Guru Charan Das. So I am seeing that it's a genre where history and today's time has been very beautifully integrated, fused. Even the youngsters, the generation are being able to relate what message has to be conveyed. But my question to you, Ashwin, is why did you choose such a complex character? What made you think that this guy in today's geopolitical scenario or probably back in the past, what is the difference that you felt about Chanakya then and the Chanakya now, the Ganga Sagar
Okay.
character?
Yeah. Okay. Sure. It's a great question. I wish it was earlier in the program, because then I wouldn't be sort of. I would love to actually spend time answering this question. But nevertheless, I think I've always been fascinated by gray characters, because life is not black and white. Life is always shades of gray. And Chanakya is one of those that you love him at one moment and you hate him at the other. So you love the fact that this was one of those most able administrators, and you read the Arthashastra and you say, wow, this could almost be a McKinsey recipe, a McKinsey manual of the ancient times in terms of how wide should a road be so that one chariot can overtake another. What should be the slope of the road so that the water drains? How frequently should you actually pay salaries to the army so that they are motivated to fight, and yet at the same time they are hungry enough to fight? So I mean, we do a great disservice to Chanakya by talking about only his political acumen, but we don't talk about the sheer wealth of administrative capability that he brought to the Arthashastra. But on the other hand, then you hate Chanakya for a lot of the other things. I mean, whether it is in terms of his use of Vishkanyas, or whether it is in terms of his attitude towards women. Probably he was a product of his times, but I mean, in today's day and age, he would be considered to be extremely chauvinistic. So in that sense, there are lots and lots of angles to the Chanakya figure. But the one thing that comes across in terms of the ancient Chanakya versus the modern Chanakya, and that I think is one thing which is very critical, is the nobility of purpose. Nobility of purpose you see in terms of the old Chanakya, in terms of the ancient Chanakya, that, okay, you can justify the means when it comes down to the ends, but the ends themselves are noble, fundamentally noble.
Yes.
Unfortunately, that nobility of purpose has been lost in today's times. And I think that's what distinguishes the Chanakya of today from the Chanakya of then.
Awesome. Thank you, Ashwin. I think you have really answered my question, and I'm so glad. Wishing you good luck and great success.
Thank you, Tarun. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye. From Ehsas Women of Hyderabad, I thank Mr. Sanghi for giving such an insight towards Indian mythology and so much more. The session has definitely left us wanting for more, like you can see. People are still wanting to ask questions, and some of them did have questions in the text, but we didn't have time to take them. Hopefully we get a chance to invite you to Hyderabad and take these questions in person. Thanks for being such a wonderful audience and tuning in. I would like to thank the Prabha Khaitan Foundation for such a wonderful session. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Vinita, and thank you, Prabha Khaitan Foundation. I had a wonderful time, and thank you for this audience. You guys have been wonderful. And all I want to do at the very end of this session is to wish you all very well and to hope that you stay safe, you stay well, you stay happy, healthy, stay at home, of course. We have no options. But I seriously hope that our next interaction will be in person when I come and meet you in Hyderabad. So all the very best.